Spectacular. Right. Immersive technology in language education. We're going to be talking about all of these terms in succession today, and I hope we all have a fantastic time. My name is Karoline Winzer, and let's go on a journey. Right, so we're going to start this with a very fun question. How many of you like to play games? Cool. Right, I'm having a very, very good crowd here. What game is your favorite? Someone shout it out.
Raccoon Tycoon.
Why?
Well, I really like the artwork, honestly. They're just very silly pictures of animals being tycoons in a little imaginary village. But it's also kind of like a weird form of Monopoly and Ticket to Ride. So it's sort of a combination of the different things I like about other games. Plus, you get to be a raccoon, who's,
I mean,
Yeah.
sold. All right. That's what I'm going to be doing after this conference. That's fantastic. So there's a visual element. Anyone else?
I'm going to be very old-fashioned. I like Scrabble
Ooh. What do you like Scrabble?
because if you're playing in a family group, some people are very good at strategy and logic, and other people have got very good vocabulary, and then you can combine people in different teams and see who can compete, and it'd be really good fun thinking about it like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I really like that. The strategy angle, storytelling, yes.
Risk.
Nice one. Why do you like Risk?
Because I like destroying my friends.
I'm glad you're honest about your motivation. I will not be playing Risk with you. All right. Okay, so my favorite game over here, Carcassonne. And the reason I like Carcassonne is because you can create these castles and landscapes in your own unique map and score points based on the things you do. And you also kind of see your progress over time, and it's also really fun. So this is actually really, really similar to another discipline, which is language learning. Now, those seem incredibly unrelated, especially for someone who, like me, has sat through a decade of memorization and grammar textbooks in school, and at the end of it could barely form 3 straight sentences in whatever language you're learning. I see nods of approval in the audience. Yeah, we have this experience. Fantastic. So the reason I'm mentioning this now is because something really cool is happening in language learning that sees languages, games, and technology cross into new and interactive realms. So that is gamification and personalization of language education with mobile apps and, crucially, artificial intelligence. So now that I have your attention with a bunch of fancy words, let's talk intro. Because to understand why this is cool, what all those words mean, and what this shift in education looks like, we're going to have to discuss why this matters, and also what is even going on. Why am I bringing this up, and what does the current industry look like? So why does language learning matter? Tons of reasons. You guys probably already know most of them. You have personal elements, increases your ability to memorize things, increases a lot of brain capacity and just brain function in general. You have social aspects, so greater ability to communicate to your friends, family, and loved ones. You have travel, so it allows you quite a lot more opportunities while you're traveling, and it gives you the opportunity to go to places. And also economic, so that's business, academic, and employment opportunities by learning additional languages. Now, I'm going to zoom into that last point really quickly to really hammer home why this matters. Because according to Cambridge and Cambridge studies that have been done, the UK alone stands to gain a conservative estimate of $11.8 billion GDP increase over 30 years from a 10% increase in students learning one foreign language, say Arabic. That number gets doubled when you add Mandarin. That number gets almost quadrupled when you add 2 European languages. You see where I'm going with this. So learning languages is important for all the reasons that I mentioned here, and increasing access to it leads to significantly higher personal and economic gain, especially in a globalized world. But especially for people who are self-studying languages or who don't have access to classes, there are some issues. And the 4 main problems are these ones: lack of guided content, lack of money and/or time, lack of long-term commitment, and lack of motivation. Now, in response to this, we've seen an explosion in digital language learning tools, which all use elements of the gamification that we've spoken about before. And to figure out how these digital apps are approaching this, we're going to look at these things today. We're going to look at the current language tech scene, what it is, what it does, what's going on, immersion and commitment, so that's different kinds of pedagogic styles and how we can increase the problem areas in this field, how generative machine learning and AI plays into all of this, and lastly, how we can branch into something which is completely new, immersive education. Current digital language tech. Right, so here are just a few possible solutions and to this problem on the market right now. I really do mean a few. There are hundreds of these apps, and all of them are trying to tackle the problems that we talked about. So that's guided content, money and time, retention, and motivation. The goal is to make people want to learn and to stick with that learning, to engage with a skill that can ultimately change their lives, like we talked about before. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of these, but it's just to make you aware of some of what is out there. We'll be pulling some specific examples from a couple of them. So Duolingo over here, yourteacher.ai, and Busuu, I think, as well, just to give a more concrete set of examples as to what I'm talking about and why it works. And we'll also be discussing the successes and shortfalls of all of these apps in the industry in general, and especially in dealing with those main problems, those 4 things that we discussed before. Awesome. Let's go into guided content. So guided content means the content is effective, it's pedagogically sound, and it's useful to you, right? That's all that means. Content is the primary objective of a language learning app. Without good content, what are you gonna do? It doesn't make any sense. So these are the 3 tenets of really good content. It's gotta be relevant, it's gotta give you good feedback, and it's got to balance the difference between input activities and output activities. I'll explain those quickly. Relevant, it's easy. It's got to be relevant to you and meaningful to what you're trying to achieve. Feedback, got to be accurate, instant, and responsive to level notes. So the responsive to level, comma, notes on right and wrong answers. So for this, you've got to have feedback which allows people who are self-studying to get answers right away instead of having to wait like you do in a class a week or 2 weeks to get your responses, and so on. And it's also got to be accurate, of course. And then this last section here, input and output, there are these are the two categories of things that you need to learn languages. So input is things like reading and listening, and output is things like writing and speaking. That's important because they're taught in different ways and have different kinds of modules associated with them. Here are 2 examples of this. We're using Busuu and Duolingo here, and they use very different styles and approaches here. So you can see flashcards versus repetitive pattern recognition on the on the right and left respectively. And immediately you can see how they're trying to balance content, right? So they're balancing input and output. They're balancing their reading and writing and listening here. So we got some reading going on, listening. This is more of the block interface that Duolingo tends to use, but this can also be writing and so on. Relevant content, useful introduction conversations in Japanese. That's really useful, especially written in the Latin alphabet if you can't yet read any of Japan's 3 alphabets. And over here on Duolingo, using words the learner has previously learned to reinforce those specific words and adding new ones progressively as you go along. And all of these apps also have instant feedback. Instant feedback is also great because it's non-threatening, so learners can learn without the fear of making quite public mistakes. This puts a lot of people off. Criticism for content, of course, can be that content can become over-gamified. This is actually a really good example over here on Duolingo. The sentence means Duo is never going to die. Duo is the Duolingo mascot. I don't really see a use case for this sentence anywhere. If anyone does, let me know. But you can see kind of how the attempt to be memorable and the attempt to be funny can sometimes lead to this over-gamification of content, especially. Another thing is that these apps tend to lack in grammar, which is usually an optional sidebar, and they're lacking in conversation practice. So 53% of learners, adult learners especially, cite speaking as why they want to learn a language, and it's not really reflected in the content of any of these apps. But content is all well and good, but this is basically the same thing you can get from a grammar textbook, right? So how do these apps keep people interested? Motivation. How do you make a learning experience motivating, especially when it comes to language learning. Enter gamification. So gamification here is the application of game dynamics, mechanics, and frameworks into non-game settings. Gamified interactions are typically engaging to complete. They provide elements like storylines, rapid feedback, and quests, and they're just fun. So we've seen some examples of this previously, and we'll go into a little bit more as we go on. Duolingo, again, is a phenomenal example of gamification and what it looks like and how it works. So I've pulled a couple of slides here from Duolingo to show you guys what's up here. And it does this it does the gamification element of this quite well in a couple of ways. So over here we can see a structured path to learning. So a journey-based interface divided into units, giving a learner a clear idea of where they are, where they've been, and where they're going next. And that overview is really helpful for you to understand the end goal, especially for adult learners, and seeing that all there. And this is often based off of frameworks like the Central European Framework of Languages and so on. Then we got some storytelling and world building, other elements of gamification that are very important. You need to get people engaged. Get people engaged with the world. We've talked about a little bit in the beginning about why people like different games, and this immersion is one of the main reasons why people like games. Get people engaged. Duolingo's characters are a key part of the app. You can see the whole cast of them there. They show up during exercises, they show up on your structured journey, and they show up in your notifications. Anyone who's ever used Duolingo will agree with me when I say that they are very passive-aggressive. And the whole point is to get you more involved in the world. They keep you interested. And Duolingo actually plays into this extremely heavily. They leverage this very annoying character cast in all of their promotional material as well. So they're creating this world around language learning. And lastly, we have rewards. So the idea of this is to keep you learning, to keep that learning habit going, and to build that habit into your life. Because even if you learn for 10 minutes a day, every single day for a year, that is 3,650 minutes that you have spent on a language. That is over 60 hours of learning, and that compounds very quickly. Rewards are mechanisms like streaks, which show you how many days you have been on the app and how many days you've used the app going forward. That's a very nice number that you like to keep up. Then you have points up here, so that's another system of rewards. And you have progress bars, which show you how far along you are in a lesson so you don't lose interest. In educational technology, building a motivation within the app itself to come back and learn is very powerful, because now it's not just you saying, I'm motivated to learn Spanish. It's the app saying, oh, there's a streak. Now I have an extrinsic motivation to go back, right? And with these apps as well, you tend to have things like haptic and audio feedback, which give you a little bit more of a multimodal and multisensory approach to learning. And they also have clear and clean interfaces, which are nice to look at. Again, graphics. Next up, we're looking at the problem of lack of money and or time, right? So classes are expensive. They are. And a lot of us don't have the time to spend hours a day learning. We have jobs, we have responsibilities, not gonna work. So these apps tend to work on a model of flexibility and adaptability. You have different things here. On the money aspect, a lot of these apps are offered at low or no cost. Duolingo famously offers something called a freemium model, which makes their language learning software accessible to absolutely everyone, with an option to pay for a premium version that then also funds their app. But it's fundamentally free. Time. You can fit this learning into moments of your day. These lessons are as short as 2 minutes long. Everyone has 2 minutes. So if you only have 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes on your commute or right before you go to bed or whatever it is, you have that variable time to make that incremental compounding progress. And third, level. So lesson level is often based on performance. This means that if you consistently get a bunch of questions wrong, your level tends to go back a little bit, so you don't get demotivated. But this is this idea of adaptability and flexibility, and helps, again, keep you motivated, keep you going when it comes to your language learning journey. But even with all of the stuff that I've just said, we're still not hitting this point. Duolingo, as an example, really tries with the pattern recognition model that we showed you earlier, but it's still not really getting there. You can give great content, and you can make it cheap, and you can make it flexible, and you can gamify it, and you can motivate the process all you want. But if you don't have a deeply personal why as to why you are learning, you don't have a deeply personal reason, you are not going to want to stay in the game or retain that information in the long run, because it's not useful to you. You have no incentive. As we know, language is a long process. It compounds, learning a language is a long process, and it compounds over time. So let's talk about how to make this compounding over time. And for this, I'm going to talk a bit about a different kind of language learning pedagogy called immersive language learning. Now, immersive language learning is a kind of language learning. Like I said, it's a specific kind of pedagogy associated with this discipline. And it's commonly regarded as one of the most successful strategies to gain an intuitive and a complete understanding of a language from the very start. And that's not just me saying that, that's the educational technology industry, several polyglots, and linguistic theory. It's also how we learn as kids. By constantly immersing ourselves into a language, into this input over and over and over again. I'll go into why this works in a moment. You can see here that students who are exposed to the language they're learning in an immersive way exhibit higher levels of fluency, particularly when motivation to learn and absorb the language is high. Cool stuff. So let's talk a little bit about why this works. So this works pretty simply. You listen a lot. You listen, you watch, you interact in in-context situations that help you build a picture of the language in a contextual setting. This often looks like, in practice, moving to a new country, watching skits that combine visual and auditory cues, and watching TV shows with a compelling story in that target language. You are exposed to the vocabulary, to the grammar in the context of a specific situation. The second thing that then happens is, ideally, you increase the level of the situations gradually. So you might start out with a very, very simple sketch, something like, where is the classroom? Really, really basic interaction. And as soon as you know that vocabulary, as soon as you kind of get the gist of it, one level up, and one level up, and one level up. So you're intuitively basically augmenting the language. And again, this is how we learn as kids. This is literally all of this input is how kids learn languages. And lastly, you kind of have this idea of recall. So intuitively recall, being able to then intuitively recall how a language works, intuitively recall vocabulary, intuitively recall grammar, because you've been presented with these situations in which you have been interacting with language, and it just makes sense. It's a very intuitive way of doing that. Right, so key points here. We've talked about this before, or in the last slide. Intuitive understanding. This is also a main point of one of the major immersive language learning theories called ALG, automatic language growth, because your language just comes to you more naturally. There's no back translation anymore. And the ALG, as an example, asks you to listen for months before you speak. The next point here is in context vocabulary. Again, you learn your vocabulary in context. You learn all of the kitchen stuff in a situation where you've been talking about going to the kitchen and making something to eat, right? It makes sense to you because you can recall it and link that knowledge with all of the other things that you've been experiencing. And lastly, it's personalized and it's relevant.
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Oh, geez. Okay, I will zoom through this. It's based entirely on your interests and goals as a person, which is extremely important. Right, so again, all of this is really, really interesting. So why do I bring this up now? Because with generative AI, this kind of personalized and immersive learning is possible. This is basically what you need to know. We've gone through a lot of this already. But basically, we can now create infinite text that is also personalized. We're going to zoom through these examples. Happy to go through them a little bit more later on. But these are some apps and some technologies that are already starting to use this AI technology. So here we have your teacher.ai, which is using AI technology to give you a conversation buddy. Again, 53% of learners say that conversation is really important to them, but you can't get it on the apps as they exist right now. So AI is helping us build these practice tools to then be able to become more comfortable with the language. He also has this idea of gamification in terms of immersive experiences and environment. So these are characters that can speak the personalized dialogue from those AI conversations and engage with you in the context of a story or immersive situation. And lastly, this kind of stuff is entirely personalized, fully personalized to you. This is an example I've done asking GPT to give me grammar examples based completely on me wanting to talk to my friends in German to test this out. Now, what is your favorite thing to do? What's your favorite thing to talk about? What if I told you that your learning for this week was to talk about your favorite thing in your favorite place with someone who gets you at your level? And that's what immersive language learning is. And this is the last section here. We have these frameworks. And now AI is making this kind of highly immersive language learning really, really relevant. We didn't have the capability to do this before. This leads us to immersive multisensory media and how emerging technologies can be mapped to this kind of personalized language learning. No one's really doing this at scale, but this example here is a start. It's called Nountown. It is VR language learning, and it incorporates those gamified elements we've spoken about, so haptics, incorporating movement, tasks, speaking to characters, becoming invested in a world, with this idea of language learning and compounding that over time. Personalization is still a long way off, but it's a start. Here's another example. This is physical gamified immersion, not for languages, but for digitization, media literacy, and sustainability. And the point here is that this is an immersive language experience that also, according to the project page here, really activates this sense of autonomy in the learning process. It activates the sense of full body, autonomy. Quote, "It's up to me what happens, I can do something to shape my own future." And the same kind of principle can be applied to language and language learning. Now, with the combination of these existing technologies, the pedagogic combination of existing tools and immersion, and the personalization power of AI, we can build never-before-seen immersive environments that intuitively communicate all of these things, right? And that is a huge win for all of the stuff we talked about before: personal, social, travel, economic, all of these things. I will end here with some challenges and criticism, because we need to talk about this as well. AI takes a lot of power to train, has a lot of environmental damage associated with it, so it's something we need to be aware of as we continue. As AI becomes more and more integrated, cost and accessibility costs will go up, hence accessibility will go down, right? So making sure that inclusion of AI elements doesn't make language learning elite. We have errors in content. We've talked about this before. Hallucination. AI can make mistakes, can and does make mistakes. Not as much as it used to, but it's still something to keep in mind. And the last thing here is limited language support and preserving culture. So limited language support, AI is trained on stuff on the internet, right? A lot of that stuff is in English. So if you want to learn an underrepresented media language, Bulgarian, Tamil, any other language you can think of that doesn't have a massive media presence, Gaelic, you're not going to have accurate AI support for that. There are projects helping with this right now. Bulgaria, as an example, is building a GPT for its language specifically, but it's still something to keep in mind. In terms of preserving culture, language is extraordinarily nuanced, and literal translation is just not going to work. So keeping that nuance in the language, culturally, idiomatically, and linguistically, is very, very important as this starts becoming more and more integrated into our language learning experiences. I'm going to leave you with a question. Last slide. What is your favorite game, and how could it make you excited to learn and to learn languages? Thank you very much, guys.